Today we are going to talk about completing the square again, only today we are going to put completing the square together with our imaginary numbers that we learned about. So we are completing the square, but some of the equations that we are solving are going to have complex solutions. So I can solve quadratics with complex solutions by completing the square. My red wasn't working. There we go. Second learning goal is to be able to write quadratic functions in vertex form. So we'll talk about that when we get to example 2. So we already should know how to complete the square. We already should know how to simplify square roots that have negatives underneath them. Now we're just combining that. So when I look at A, if I want to complete the square, I know that it needs to be in the form ax squared plus bx equals c. So this one is not in this form. This one's equal to 0, so I need to get it in that form by moving this plus 10 to the other side through subtraction. So that gives me x squared minus 8x equals negative 10. So that is now in the correct form for completing the square. Next step in completing the square is to factor out the coefficient of the squared term. Remember, this is not a GCF. You're not taking out the x, just the coefficient of the x squared term. In this case, that coefficient's 1, so there's nothing to take out. So that means I go on to adding my blanks on both sides. And once I add my blanks, I need to fill them in. So we fill in the left side blank, b divided by 2 squared. So b in this case is negative 8, divided by 2 is negative 4, squared is 16. To fill in the blank on the right side, remember you multiply times whatever's out in front times the 16. Well, in front here is just a 1, so 1 times 16 is 16. So now that I have my blanks complete, I simplify the individual sides. So on the left side, simplifying means I need to factor it as a PST. So square root of x squared is x. Square root of 16 is 4. The sign in the middle is a minus, and all PSTs have a squared on them. On the right side, negative 10 plus 16 is positive 6. And so now I can solve by taking square roots. So square root both sides. So I've got x minus 4 on the left. On the right side, I've got plus or minus radical 6. I would look to see if this simplifies. This does not, because 6 doesn't have any perfect square factors. So all I need to do now is to add the 4 to both sides. So 4 plus or minus radical 6 should be our answer. Now notice on this one, I didn't have a complex solution. I didn't get i's. You're not going to get i's in every problem, just some of them. So you're only going to have i's if you end up with a negative. All right, so let's look at B. Again, it needs to be in this ax squared plus bx plus c equals c form, and this one is not, so I need to subtract the 18 on both sides first before I do anything else. So 6x squared minus 12x equals negative 18. So now, after I've got it in the right form, first step is to factor out the coefficient. So the coefficient is 6, so that's going to leave me x squared minus 2x. I'm going to go ahead and add my blanks now on both sides. I always get people here who try to make this factored out the 6. Remember, you cannot factor over an equal sign. You're only factoring the left side. Okay, so now I need to fill in my blank. So my b value is negative 2, so negative 2 over 2 squared is what goes in my left blank. So negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1, squared is positive 1. To get my right side blank, I do my little swoop here. So 6 times 1 gives me 6. Oops, and it looks like I forgot to bring down my negative. That will be a problem here in a second if I didn't remember that. All right, so on the left side, I need to simplify. I've got my 6 out in front. I need to factor this as a PST, so I know it's going to have a squared. Square root of x squared is x. Square root of 1 is 1. Sign in the middle is a minus. On the right side, negative 18 plus 6 is negative 12. So now, don't take a square root yet. The squared term is not alone. I need to get the squared term alone first, so I need to divide by 6. So x minus 1 squared equals negative 2. Now the squared term is alone, so now I can square root both sides. So on the left side, I've got x minus 1 equals. On the right side, I know it's going to be a plus or minus. Because there's a negative, I know there's going to be an I in my answer. And square root of 2 doesn't simplify. I can't bring out any perfect square factors, so that part's going to stay the same. So I've got plus or minus I radical 2 on the left side, or right side rather. So last step is to add the 1. Remember, these are not like terms. The positive 1, you can't add that with i's, and you also can't add it with square roots. So can't combine those, so it just stays 1 plus or minus I radical 2. All right, one more of these completing the square. These steps, if these steps are not in your memory yet, you need to keep practicing these problems, because it's one thing to understand the steps when I do them, but it's another to be able to go through those steps yourself. So if you don't know what to do next, if you're waiting for me to tell you, you need to practice some more of these or get some extra help. All right, so first thing I do is check the format. I've got ax squared plus bx equals c, so this one is in the right form. So I can go ahead and factor out my coefficient on the left. So when I factor out the 3, I've got x squared plus 12x. And I need blanks on both sides. To fill in my blank, here my b value is 12, so it's going to be 12 divided by 2 squared. 12 divided by 2 is 6, squared is 36. So now I need to fill in my blank on the right. Remember that I do that with this little swoop here. So 3 times 36 gives me 108. That's what goes in the blank on the right, is 108. So now left side, I'm going to factor it. So that's going to be x plus 6 squared, because square root of x squared is x, square root of 36 is 6. Always get a squared on it. On the right side over here, negative 42 plus 108 is 66. Again, do not take square roots yet. The squared term is not alone. Divide by 3 first. So I've got x plus 6 squared equals 22. So now I can take the square root on both sides. Square root, x plus 6 equals plus or minus radical 22. Radical 22 does not break down. It's 11 times 2, but that's the end. There's no pairs, nothing to bring out. So now I just subtract the 6. So negative 6 plus or minus radical 22 is your answer. All right. So our second learning goal today is to be able to write quadratic functions in vertex form. So several lessons ago, we had problems on your classwork that asked you to write a quadratic function in intercept form. So it started out looking like standard form, and you had to write it in intercept form. And I told you that that's just a fancy way of telling you to factor. Asking you to write something in vertex form is the fancy way of telling you to complete the square, because remember that vertex form of a quadratic looks like this. it has to have this squared term. Whereas intercept form looked like this, x minus p, x minus q. So you can see the difference. Intercept form is telling you to factor because I've got two parentheses. Vertex form, which is what we're looking at today, is telling you to complete the square because I need a PST here. So on these ones, we're going to have some steps that we need to follow. And the first of that is that we are going to separate the constant. So we are going to move the constant over with the y. Once we've done that, then we're going to complete the square just like we have been. Then we're going to have to move the constant back. All right, so let's look at what this actually looks like with a real problem. So the first thing I'm going to do is move the constant over with the y. So my constant is this, so I'm going to add 5 and get it over with the y. So I've got y plus 5 equals 2x squared plus 4x. So on my right side here, now I'm going to complete the square. So when I complete the square, I need to factor out the coefficient of the squared term. So I factor out the 2, got x squared plus 2x. Here's my blank. On the right side, I've got y plus 5 plus the blank that I need to add. So now I need to fill in my blank. So my b value here is 2. So I've got 2 divided by 2 squared, which is 1. Now, because we're on the opposite side, where normally our completing the square is on the left, now it's on the right, our little swoop kind of goes backwards. So we go 1 times 2 to get what goes in the blank here, which is 2. So then, on the left side, combine like terms. 5 plus 2 is 7, equals, factor this as a PST. So you know it's going to look like this. Square root of x squared is x. Square root of 1 is 1. Sign in the middle is a plus. So I have completed the square. This is completed. Now, third step is to move the constant back. We're not solving anything. We're just putting it in vertex form, which looks like this. So subtract the 7 back over. And we've got y equals, these cancel, 2x plus 1 squared minus 7. So that's our vertex form. Now notice that after we get it in vertex form, it wants us to identify the vertex, axis of symmetry, domain, and range. This is practicing identifying these without looking at the graph, because those are things that you should know just from looking at the equation. Notice it doesn't ask for everything. It doesn't ask for x-intercepts, y-intercepts, all of those things. But when you're in vertex form, remember the vertex is HK. So change the sign here, -1. Keep the sign here, -7. Axis of symmetry, remember, is always an x equals line through the x-coordinate of the vertex. So it's x equals -1. You don't even need to look at the graph to know that. That's a rule. Next are domain and range. Well, this is a quadratic, and all of our quadratics have had all real number domains. Range, y values. They always start at the y-coordinate of the vertex, and they either get smaller or get bigger depending on which way they open. This one opens up, so we know it's going to be greater than or equal to whatever the y-coordinate of the vertex was, which is -7. So here, all of these are parts of our answer. So here's our vertex form, and then here's the information we should be able to get from it. All right, so I would like for you to try B, pause it, try to identify all of the stuff, then unpause and see if you got it right. So first thing I'm going to do is move my constant over with my y. So that gives me y plus 7 equals -2x squared minus 8x. So next I'm going to factor out my coefficient. So factor out a -2. That gives me x squared plus 4x. Add my blank. On the left side, y plus 7, and add my blank. So now filling in the blank, my b value is 4, so 4 divided by 2 squared. 4 divided by 2 is 2, 2 squared is 4. To fill in my blank on the other side, I have to do my swoop, so 4 times -2 is -8. So now simplify. Left side, +7 plus -8 is -1, so I've got y minus 1 equals -2. I know I need to factor this as a PST. Square root of x squared is x. Square root of 4 is 2. Sign in the middle is a plus. Last step, so I moved the constant. I completed the square. Now I need to move the constant back, so add the 1. So I've got y equals -2 x plus 2 squared plus 1 as my vertex form. Once I've got vertex form, you should be able to identify all of these things. So vertex, HK, change the sign here, keep the sign here. Axis of symmetry, AOS, x equals whatever the x coordinate of the vertex is, so -2. Domain, it's all reals. And range. This one opens down. If I just asked you to show me what shape it had, hopefully you would draw this. So if it opens down, that means my range is going to have a less than or equal to, and it's always less than or greater than whatever the y coordinate of the vertex is, which in this case is 1. So all reals less than or equal to 1. All right. That is it for this lesson.